NBC News, New York. Czechoslovakia's new and enlarged Presidium, most of whose members do not meet Soviet Russia's conservative specifications, met today to see what it could do about getting Russian troops out of the country and preserving as many of the liberal reforms as possible. Deputy Premier František Hamuz told the people that perhaps Soviet troops would begin to leave in a few days if the people would stop opposing them. In Moscow, the Soviet press, apparently satisfied with the way things are now going in Czechoslovakia, suddenly praised party leader Dubček as a fighting soldier and President Svoboda as a brave, self-controlled officer. But Czechoslovakia is not entirely reconciled to the Soviet invasion. Here is a report from NBC News correspondent Dean Braylis.
The Soviet tanks were hidden off the main streets, waiting to kill or waiting for orders from Moscow to withdraw. There were no orders. A bomb had exploded. No one knew who was responsible, the Russians or the Czechs. The Russians said they had not made a mistake. Their Soviet bomb clearance squads did not make mistakes, they said. The Czechs equally disclaimed any knowledge of the bomb. But whoever planted it, the bomb had exploded. It had shattered windows of Russian-occupied buildings. The explosion, according to some Czechs, also proved that there was some resistance left here in Czechoslovakia, and that Pravda's report that the Russians were greeted here as heroes was totally unfounded. Dean Braylis, NBC News, Prague.
President Ceausescu of Romania, who sided with Czechoslovakia in its attempt to prevent a Soviet invasion, now is trying to keep Soviet and other hardline East Bloc troops out of his country. He wants Warsaw Pact maneuvers postponed or canceled. In Paris, the Soviet ambassador dismissed rumors of a Russian plan to invade Romania as absolutely without foundation. The Czechoslovak situation has led NATO officials to revise Western defense plans. One of their first moves is expected to be an appeal to the United States to stop taking troops out of Europe. The Russian invasion of Czechoslovakia has presented many of its people with a major problem, whether to stay in the country or leave it. Here is a report from NBC News correspondent Frank Burkholzer.
At every border crossing point between Austria and Czechoslovakia, there are more Czechoslovak people going home than there are people running away, by quite a large margin. Still in all, the Russian occupation of the country has created a problem for every person of Czech or Slovak nationality, the problem of whether to become a refugee. And a lot of people are making the decision not to go back. These three young men came out from the city of Brno. They would have gone across the border to West Germany, which is closer, but that border has Russians on it, and they couldn't get through. So they came to Bratislava, and now they're on the road to Vienna. The style of this exodus is quite different from the exodus of 12 years ago from Hungary. There's even time for these people to stop along the way and take advantage of their arrival in the season of the new wine. The newspaper they brought along has the story about 27 of their compatriots whom the Russians killed in their town of Brno, and the blank column in the middle of the page to show that the censor is back at work. But the large numbers of Czechs are handled by the specially organized Help Czechs Committee. Over the weekend, they had 7,000 people to find sleeping places for, in summer camps, in private homes, and in several of the big sports halls around Vienna where 2,000 or 3,000 people each could be accommodated. As bad as things are, these people from Czechoslovakia are not yet being called refugees. They're technically traveling outside Czechoslovakia, and they conceivably may go back. And so they're called tourists. But as things get worse, which they do each day, the problem becomes more and more a refugee problem. Frank Burkholzer, NBC News, Vienna.
The Huntley Brinkley Report is produced by NBC News and brought to you in color by Dristan Tablets. Relieves watery eyes, sinus congestion, and sneezing caused by hay fever. Dristan, for inner protection against hay fever and summer cold's miseries.
You throw a lot of good things in here that cost a lot of money. Permanent press, synthetics, colors. So why risk yellowing or graying from strong stain removing? That's why we invented Safe Day Bright Bleach. You just can't buy anything safer and better to help whiten and brighten than Day Bright with borax and 2 brighteners. Use strong bleach or pre-soak for tough stains, and Day Bright to whiten and brighten everything else.
Don't let a summer cold shut you off from summer fun. Take fast-acting Dristan tablets. In less time than it takes to play a game of tennis, your head can clear. Your headache, too, because Dristan contains millions of active molecules of fast-acting medication, more than any time capsule, plus a full dose of aspirin, all combined in Dristan. Take fast-acting Dristan tablets and get back in action, fast. The summer saver.
Iran today decreed official mourning for the 20,000 people killed over the weekend in the worst earthquake in the country's history. More than 50,000 people were injured and thousands of buildings destroyed. This morning, new tremors struck the area, 1,300 square miles of eastern Iran, destroying more villages and killing more people. In Vietnam, the enemy today bombarded the center of Da Nang City for the first time in the war. 27 civilians were killed, 46 wounded. Previously, only the big American base outside the city had been attacked. North and west of Saigon, B-52 bombers dropped 175 tons of bombs on enemy infiltration routes. The pacification program in South Vietnam was seriously disrupted by the 2 enemy offensives earlier this year, but the Allies are patching it up wherever they can. Here is a report from NBC News correspondent Liz Trotta on a hamlet in Long An province.
This is Long An province. Since 1962, it has been an important testing ground for the pacification program. Only 25 miles south of Saigon, Long An is a busy area of activity for the Viet Cong. Amidst the flat rice fields and coconut trees lies Lac Tien Mot, a hamlet like many others in South Vietnam, which the government describes as pacified. In fact, it has been pacified 3 times. Its overall average in official pacification files is D+. There are no young men in Lac Tien Mot. The Army has taken them. A pacification team was sent in last year to win the loyalty of the people, but little was accomplished, as in the 2 previous pacification attempts. The pacification team stayed for 6 months and left behind what have now become symbols of token pacification, a school and a dispensary. The school has been burned 3 times. People in the hamlet say it was the Viet Cong. To burn a school is to destroy a familiar sign of pacification. The dispensary has been open for 4 months. Only 2 women have had their babies delivered by the midwives there. Only a handful of people have requested medical attention. Most stay away because they fear reprisals from the Viet Cong. But even if they wanted to be treated, it would be futile. There is no medicine, no equipment. One night, the Viet Cong came and simply took it all away. The hamlet chief of Lac Tien Mot is, like politicians everywhere, an outgoing man. He says only more troops will make his people safe from the Viet Cong. During the night, he adds, the guerrillas go from house to house collecting taxes. The chief does not sleep here. In and around the hamlet, there are 2 companies of South Vietnamese regional forces. Their job is to defend the area and, theoretically, to hunt down the Viet Cong on patrols. In daylight, the regional forces move freely. Few in number and poorly armed, they pull back into the hamlet at night, leaving the Viet Cong to rule the countryside. American and regular South Vietnamese troops in the vicinity of Lac Tien Mot are looking for the Viet Cong. Often a Viet Cong suspect is seized. This one was believed to be part of a terrorist group operating in the area of Lac Tien Mot. Officials in Saigon say an emphasis on security will be a new look in the pacification program. In fact, they've even named August Self-Defense Month. But new looks and new plans are old words for the people of South Vietnam, such as the villagers of Lac Tien Mot. The government may have left its traces of pacification. The Viet Cong have not left. Liz Trotta, NBC News, South Vietnam.
Israel today called for an urgent meeting of the United Nations Security Council to hear charges that Egyptian forces had ambushed an Israeli patrol on the east bank of the Suez Canal last week. Egypt has denied responsibility. Tunisia walked out of an Arab foreign ministers meeting in Cairo, accusing Egypt of trying to dictate policy to the Arab world. The Tunisian delegate had asked an investigation of what he called Egyptian errors in last year's Middle East war. The Sinai Desert, where the retreating Egyptian army was destroyed 14 months ago, has become an Israeli tourist attraction. NBC News correspondent Alvin Rosenfeld reports.
Tours of the occupied Sinai Desert are now regularly scheduled affairs, and very popular too, perhaps because the Sinai, while forbidding, is so different. Sightseers go bumping across the back roads of the Sinai in American vehicles which are not quite as bright and efficient as they were a quarter century ago. Their reward, if that is how it can be defined, is a trip through the Mitla Pass, where Israel's Air Force caught and destroyed the retreating Egyptian armor 14 months ago. That men bled and died here not long ago hardly seems to register in the minds of the tourists. The desert is inhospitable. In the wastes of the Sinai, the tourists apparently satisfy their immense thirst for adventure, for visual sensations, for a vicarious contact with some of the grimmer pages of history. Alvin Rosenfeld, NBC News, at the Mitla Pass in the Sinai.
If you could put Tareyton's charcoal filter on the end of your cigarette, if you could put Tareyton's charcoal filter on your cigarette. Well, anyway, if you could put Tareyton's charcoal filter on your cigarette, you'd have a better tasting cigarette. Of course, we can't guarantee it'd smoke as smooth as a Tareyton. To begin with, no other cigarette has Tareyton tobacco. And when that tobacco is smoothed by Tareyton's activated charcoal filter, it tastes even milder. Better face it, if you want your cigarette to smoke as smooth as a Tareyton, it'll just have to be a Tareyton with the activated charcoal filter. That's why us Tareyton smokers would rather fight than switch.
Vice President Humphrey today called for the creation of a blue ribbon committee to study the actions of demonstrators, police, and the news media in last week's Chicago disturbances. He said the committee should consist of lawyers, sociologists, policemen, and journalists, but not public officials. Humphrey made the suggestion in a television interview taped for the Educational Network in New York. During the interview, he said he believes Chicago police overreacted during the disturbances. Earlier in the day, Humphrey marched in New York's Labor Day parade. NBC News correspondent Jack Perkins reports.
Hubert Humphrey said this morning, "I'm going to walk up this avenue and right into the White House." Then, going the wrong way up a one-way street, he led New York's Labor Day parade up Fifth Avenue. He walked side by side with George Meany, head of the AFL-CIO and one of Humphrey's early and prime supporters. They passed several who were not supporters.
Hold them up there. Go ahead.
Humphrey came to New York for Labor Day instead of Detroit, which is traditional for Democratic nominees, because Meany, who supports him, is here, and Walter Reuther, who does not, is in Detroit. Security was more than adequate. There were no outbursts of dissension. There were no outbursts of anything. It was a lethargic parade. Not many people are in New York on Labor Day. After marching 20 blocks, Humphrey took to the reviewing stand to watch the parade passing by for another hour. There were bands and drums and bugles and bagpipes. There were Chinese girls handing out fortune cookies, each one with the same fortune. Quote, "Wise citizen knows that vote for Humphrey is vote for better life." And there was the candidate holding a child, at which point cameramen were finally allowed to close in and get the picture. But Humphrey's aides wanted one thing made clear, whatever difference it makes. They wanted people to know that this is not the formal opening of the Humphrey campaign. That will come next week. He came here as a favor to George Meany, but all day long, Humphrey didn't make a single speech. So it couldn't be a Humphrey campaign. Anyhow, he was here, he got some attention, and he seemed to enjoy himself. He came to New York just for this, and then flew back home to Minnesota. He will spend the next week there resting and trying to relax before the campaign actually begins, a week from today. In this week, Hubert Humphrey must ponder the problem of Lyndon Johnson. Now that he has the nomination in his own right, how much should Hubert Humphrey try to run on the Johnson record, and how much should he try to run away from it? That is what he will be trying to decide this week in Minnesota.
Richard Nixon may have watched Humphrey marching in the parade. Nixon spent the day resting in his New York apartment, which overlooks Fifth Avenue. He opens his campaign Wednesday in Chicago. Third-party candidate George Wallace spent the day at a stock car race in Darlington, South Carolina. He told a cheering crowd of 70,000 that his candidacy has been helped by what he called the mess in Chicago and the mess both national parties have gotten us into. In Berea, Kentucky, 14 men, whites and Negroes, have been arrested as a result of a gun battle yesterday in which one white man and one Negro were killed. The shooting started at the end of a National States Rights Party rally. Dozens of Negro organizations met this weekend in Philadelphia for the third annual International Conference on Black Power. NBC News correspondent Lem Tucker reports.
More than 3,000 black people came together not so much to agree on a single philosophy, but on ideas which would lead to more practical applications of black power. Most reporters were barred from the discussions, so it is impossible to say exactly what happened inside. But on the outside, it was apparent that the delegates found very little unity. One militant leader announced that his and several other groups were breaking away from the conference, and he told why.
The Black United Front feels that since the Black Power Conference has not addressed itself to the needs of the average black brother and sister on the street, that the leadership has not recognized its need to be loyal to the black nation, that we consider the Black Power Conference under its present leadership as being illegitimate of representing the interests of black America.
Widely spaced one from another.
Separation of black and white America. Whatever his political persuasion, he too expressed feelings that many others voiced only privately.
Existed at the conference. The people who came here came with a hope that they could all work jointly together. We haven't seen many of the people who are here, that we know are here, from various parts of the country, and we think that that worked a hardship on many of these people, and it worked a hardship on their hopes and aspirations, because I'm sure that each person here hoped that we would have serious confrontation, and then the informal opportunities to contact one another would have been available, and they were absent with this balkanization, as it were, of the conference.
Ron Karinga heads a militant group known formally as US, or US. As one of the official conference spokesmen, he disagreed with the criticisms.
We progress. If everyone came with the same idea, then what could we develop new? But if people come with diverse elements and yet be unified in that diversity, then we have succeeded not only to maintain a viable structure of the conference, but to out of that create a constructive dialogue that would lead to some programmatic development.
A majority of the delegates finally found unity around the idea of creating what they called a separate, free, independent nation for black people. The plan was formulated by Robert Williams, who is now in self-exile in China. Brother Imari spoke for the proposed nation.
We have an organized government. The only thing we lack is the land. We have now made a claim that can be substantiated in international law to land, to the 5 states and moreover to the black ghettos, so-called. The problem now is for us to make that claim stick, and we'll do it by use of international resources, the aid and help, both moral and physical, of friends from the third world. And we will do it by the grit of our people, just as the Vietnamese did it. We will do it by strategy, military strategy, as well as diplomatic strategy that takes into consideration the elements that are available to us in this country.
No matter what the official spokesman said, a great number of delegates left unsure about the future of the conference and the entire Black Power movement. Most of them do not believe they will get a separate state. But most do believe that until black people find some kind of unity, they will never be able to successfully combat the problems of racism in America. Lem Tucker, NBC News.
In Milwaukee, a radio disc jockey has done what he could this summer to keep things cool. Here is a report by John McCullough of station WTMJ, Milwaukee.
Milwaukee disc jockey O.C. White calls it his Clean Green Project. He hires boys and girls to fix up run-down homes in their own neighborhoods. White promotes the project between records.
Good afternoon to you, everybody. How you doing today? O.C. White on the way. Take note, we've completed the house, and it's open for your inspection, the exterior, that is. And when the people out in the minority community drive through, they will know that we had a good thing to do.
This house was the first to be painted. The youngsters worked only on the outside, painted the house, reached out at the lawn, replaced exterior lights, and even added a picket fence. In an office over an old theater, 1,100 youngsters signed up for work, but there's been only enough money to employ 50. 20 Milwaukee business firms donated $1,000 each to finance the project. Other firms contributed paint and supplies. This is how the home of Mrs. Mamie Williams looked before its paint job. Mrs. Williams is a widow with 14 children. To be eligible for the renovation project, a house owner must be either a widow with no support or a man unable to work and provide for his family. Those hired by the Clean Green Project must report by 8 o'clock in the morning. They're fined if they're late. Uniforms and materials are passed out by White. He pays the teenagers $1.50 an hour. They work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Adults supervise the project. 30 boys and girls worked on Mrs. Williams' house. They finished in 3 days. About 20 homeowners have qualified for the Clean Green Project so far. The project has several goals: to give vacationing youngsters profitable summer employment, to keep them out of trouble, and to beautify a once gracious neighborhood.
I've lived in that area for 25 years, and it was beautiful and green most every place you go when I was a youngster in the area. And if we can get that feeling again, we're sure it's fine if you're able to live in the outlying communities where they got $40,000 homes, but what are the people going to do who are not able to do this? And some of these people aren't able to, and let's work with what we have and make it beautiful.
Been a rough week. You've been waiting all week for this weekend, but there's a fly in the oatmeal, a headache, the painful kind that makes you feel tense. But a boy deserves a full-time father. How do you shake this headache? Anacin. Anacin relaxes the tension as it relieves pain. Life's fun again.
The Huntley-Brinkley Report continues. Brought to you by your Phillips 66 dealers from coast to coast. At Phillips 66, it's performance that counts.
Do you know how to charge a battery? A set of spark plugs? with the Supercharger, a Phillips 66 credit card. Good at every Phillips 66 station in all 50 states. Every Best Western and Quality Courts motel. And every Hertz rent-a-car office. The Supercharger. Ask any Phillips 66 dealer for an application. And charge something.
Nigerian forces were reported moving into the Biafran city of Aba and menacing the airstrips into which Red Cross airplanes have been flying food supplies. The commander of the Biafran forces within Aba denies that the city had fallen or that the airstrips are in danger. The International Red Cross headquarters in Geneva said it's increasing its airlift to Biafra and will deliver 3,500 tons of food there tomorrow and Wednesday. Walter Reed Army Medical Center reported today that former President Eisenhower had a good night last night, and his progress continues to be favorable. He now is allowed to sit up in bed for longer periods. The Russian soldiers who occupied Prague know they're not welcome, and they are faced with a twofold task, that of boosting their own morale and soothing the Czechoslovaks. Yesterday, a Soviet equivalent of the USO's singers and dancers from Moscow put on a show for the soldiers and any Prague people who cared to watch. The Moscow troop had no difficulty in entertaining the Russian soldiers. They had less success in convincing the people of Prague what good fellows the Russians are. There weren't that many citizens around to watch. Good night for NBC News.
See you at AFL.